You eat dinner in about 20 minutes, you barely chew. Food arrives soft, already broken down by heat, and your jaw does the bare minimum before you swallow, a few easy bites and it's gone. You don't think of that as strange. You should. Almost nothing else alive on this planet gets to eat that easily. A chimpanzee, your closest living relative, spends roughly 6 hours a day chewing, not eating. Chewing. Raw leaves, raw fruit, raw stems, grinding away with a jaw built for the job, the same mouthful worked over again and again before it's even worth swallowing, because raw food gives up its calories slowly and only after serious mechanical effort. You spend a fraction of that time on food, total, and still walk away with more usable energy than they do. So what changed? And why does it matter enough to spend a whole video on? The most influential answer came from a Harvard primatologist named Richard Wrangham. In his book, Catching Fire, Wrangham laid out what's now called the cooking hypothesis, that the controlled use of fire to cook food wasn't a minor convenience in human history. It was the event that made the rest of human evolution possible. Here's the logic, and it starts with something deceptively simple. Cooking is a kind of outsourced digestion, work your stomach used to have to do alone, now handed off to a fire before the first bite is even taken. Heat breaks down tough plant fibres and connective tissue in meat before any of it reaches your stomach. Starches gelatinize, swelling and softening into something your gut can take apart almost effortlessly. Proteins denature, unfolding into shapes your digestive system can absorb far more easily than the tightly coiled raw version. The same piece of meat or root vegetable delivers dramatically more usable energy cooked than raw, for less chewing and less metabolic work extracting it. You're not just eating. You're eating something your own body no longer has to work nearly as hard to turn into fuel. Wrangham didn't leave this as a guess. His research group ran feeding experiments on animals like pythons and mice, giving one group raw meat or raw starch and another group the same food cooked, then tracking weight gain. Again and again, the animals eating cooked food gained more weight on the exact same ingredients, simply because cooking had already done part of the digestive work for them before a single bite was taken. That extra freed up fuel had to go somewhere. An anthropologist named Leslie Aiello and a physiologist named Peter Wheeler proposed an idea in 1995 known as the expensive tissue hypothesis. Brains are metabolically expensive. Pound for pound, your brain burns far more energy at rest than almost any other organ you have, something like a fifth of your entire resting energy budget, just to keep all that signalling running. So does your gut, constantly working to break down and absorb whatever you eat, lined with tissue that has to constantly renew itself and stay active even when you're not digesting anything at all. Aiello and Wheeler looked across primates more broadly and noticed a pattern. Species with bigger guts tended to have smaller brains relative to their body size, and species with smaller guts tended to have more room, metabolically, for a bigger brain. Their argument: a body can't easily afford to keep both of those expensive organs large at the same time. Something has to shrink to let the other grow. Once cooking started doing part of digestion's job outside the body, the gut itself could afford to get smaller. A smaller gut costs less energy to maintain. That freed up energy, the argument goes, could be redirected somewhere else, metabolically expensive: a growing brain. This isn't just a story dreamed up to explain a strange habit. It shows up in the bones themselves. preserved in stone for anyone willing to look closely enough. Compare the skeletons of early Homo erectus, who lived roughly 2 million years ago, to earlier hominins like Australopithecus. Australopithecus had a wide, flaring ribcage built to house a large, slow-fermenting gut and a heavy jaw with broad molars suited to grinding tough, fibrous, raw plant food for hours. Homo erectus looked different. Smaller teeth, a lighter jaw, a noticeably narrower and more tube-shaped ribcage, consistent with a smaller gut and a larger brain case sitting on top of it all. Something in their diet and digestion had clearly changed, freeing up room and energy that earlier ancestors didn't have to spare. The hardest part of this story has always been finding fire itself, since flames and ash don't fossilise the way bone does. But at Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa, researchers, including Francesco Berna, working with a team led by archaeologist Michael Chazan, excavated layer after layer of cave sediment and found burned bone fragments and ashed plant remains deep inside the cave, in a layer dated to roughly 1 million years ago. The burning showed the unmistakable signs of low, controlled temperatures, not the kind a wildfire sweeping past the entrance would leave behind. Deep inside a cave is important here too. Lightning doesn't start fires a kilometre underground, and wildfires don't wander in and quietly burn one spot for a while. Someone carried that fire in, fed it, and kept it going. Picture what that actually changed about a single day. Without fire, your morning starts with a search for something edible right now, raw, and then a long, slow process of grinding it down with your back teeth, hour after hour, just to get enough calories to make it to evening. Tough roots, fibrous stalks, raw meat that takes real effort just to tear and swallow. Foraging and chewing fill nearly the entire day, the way they still do for a chimpanzee. There's very little time left over for anything else, because there's no margin. Every hour not spent finding or processing food is an hour your body can't easily afford, and every calorie has to be fought for twice, once to find it and once to physically break it down. Add fire, and the math changes completely. You gather food during the day, same as before, and only afterward, around a fire as the light fades, the hardest part of the work gets handed off to heat instead of your jaw. Meat that would have taken an hour of tearing and grinding softens in minutes. A tough root turns soft enough to mash apart with a thumb. A meal that once took hours of chewing might now take a fraction of that. The calories arrive faster, more completely, and so does the free time behind them. Time that could go toward making a better tool, teaching a child, travelling further from camp, or simply resting by the fire that just did half the day's work for you. Here's the part that should make this feel a little less comfortable. Cooking didn't just save time. Once human bodies adapted to it, generation after generation, with smaller jaws, smaller guts, weaker chewing muscles, it stopped being optional. Modern humans who try to live entirely on raw food, even with the help of blenders and food processors no ancient forager ever had, run into real trouble. Studies of long-term raw food dieters have found unusually low body weight and, in many women, a loss of menstrual cycles entirely, signs the body isn't getting enough usable energy, even when the eaters are deliberately choosing nutrient-dense raw foods and putting in real effort to make up the difference. A modern human gut, the same gut a million years of cooking helped shrink down, often can't extract enough calories from raw food alone to keep the whole body fully running, no matter how carefully the meals are planned. It's a strange kind of inheritance. Somewhere across that million years, your ancestors made a trade they couldn't undo and didn't get a vote on undoing, generation handing the deal off to generation without ever pausing to ask if it was reversible. A bigger brain in exchange for a body that quietly stopped being able to feed itself the way every other animal around it still could. In other words, you're not just a creature who learned to cook. You're a creature who can no longer fully function without it. The trade Aiello and Wheeler described went one way and stayed that way. You eat dinner in about 20 minutes and you barely think about it. You definitely don't think about your jaw, your gut, or the size of your own skull while you're doing it. But that 20 minutes is sitting on top of roughly 1,000,000 years of a body slowly renegotiating itself around a fire it never stopped needing, trading away a bigger gut for a bigger brain, and betting everything, every single generation since, on the fact that the flames would keep being there the next time it got hungry.